In this special episode, iitaly goes to Washington, D.C. to meet Gabriel A. Battista, former president and CEO of Talk America, and newly elected co-chair of the National Italian-American Foundation. Italian Leadership in America is a series co-produced by iitaly and NIAF.
I'm John Viola, the president of the National Italian-American Foundation, and it's my great honor to partner with iitaly in bringing you these intimate looks at the lives of the Italian Americans of Washington, D.C. Today we'll sit down with Gabe Battista, a vice chairman of the National Italian-American Foundation and a longtime executive in the telecom industry. Gabe is the chairman of the American University in Rome and a proud supporter of all we do here at the National Italian-American Foundation. It's a real pleasure for me to introduce him to all of you.
Gabriel Battista, thank you very much for being here tonight with us. And we would like to start with your ancestors. So when did they come here for the first time?
Well, my father came in 1927. His father, Pietro Battista, came to the United States after the First World War, and he worked and traveled back and forth and sent money to Italy. On my mother's side, my grandmother and grandfather came here, and my mother was born 6 months after arriving in Philadelphia. She always said she was from Giulianova. Both families grew up in Philadelphia, both in Italian neighborhoods. My father's neighborhood was a neighborhood with all Melanzani. Really, my dad was born in a place called Macchi di Isernia, which is a small little town off the side of Isernia. I think it literally means spot of Isernia. On my mother's side, they were all from Giulianova. And they came here, and they lived in a fairly large, 4 square block Italian neighborhood, which I grew up in. When my mom and dad met, they met at a church social in this Italian national parish, which was called Our Lady of the Angels. My father went to 4 years of school in Italy. My mother went to 6 years of school in the United States. She actually left school to go to work at the age of 13. She was the oldest of 5 siblings to help make money. But the direction, the inspiration, and basically what I feel is the success of my life, if you call it successful, came from them. And they never taught me about prejudice. I didn't think prejudice existed, although later in life I had incidents that people would look at me and say, "You're an Italian." And to me, that was a foreign thing because I grew up in a world of all Italians. And all Italians, but almost all of them from Abruzzo and Molise. When my grandparents came there to this neighborhood, is because other relatives were there. So what I found out later in life, as I learned how to read and write and speak Italian and travel to Italy, that all of my friends, parents or grandparents, were from the same place. Somebody must have came first. And then when someone wanted to come here in the mass immigration to the United States, they must have had some way to contact, I don't know how, but they all ended up in the same place.
But the families didn't know each other.
They didn't know each other because one was from Isernia in Molise and the other was from Giulianova. They met at a church social in this Italian parish. The Italian parish was unique. In the United States, certainly in Philadelphia, the Irish Catholic Church was really not happy about the bringing in of other Catholics, like Italians, like Polish people, like Ukrainians, and they really wanted them to go away. So there was a parish close to where my parents live. It was a very large Irish parish called Our Mother of Sorrows. And they basically said, you have to say Mass in this little room. And really what you should do is build your own church. So in 1911, these immigrants built a church. And the church was called a national parish because the establishment of the Catholic Church was okay to have national parishes because then they could be separate from them. And so my parish, and I believe when I was a boy there were 35 or 40 of them in Philadelphia, not just Italian, Ukrainian, Polish, different names. And in order for me to go to that grammar school, which they built, I believe, in 1930, I had to be of Italian descent. And that national parish system stayed in place till 1976, when the Archdiocese decided it was discriminatory, because what would happen would be these little enclaves would have their own school, and even though neighborhoods were changing around them, they didn't change. They had their school, they had their church, they had the baker, they had this, they had that. And as long as they had a school, they stayed there. What happened was, when they eliminated the national parishes, people fled to the suburbs, to other areas, because of the kinds of racial tensions that existed. And so my grammar school literally closed.
You were speaking about discrimination before, episodes in which you felt discriminated because of your being Italian. Give us some example.
Well, I'll give you the prime example, which was really shocking to me. I had the opportunity and to work to pay for my own tuition. I worked in high school, and then I worked while I went to college at a industrial bakery for the Acme Markets, which is a big supermarket chain in Philadelphia. And I paid for my tuition, and I worked as I went through school. And I had very good grades from Villanova University as an engineer. I went to college to get an education because I was told this would be your ticket to be able to get a good job. So I went to work for General Electric. I was 21, 22 years old, and there were no other Italian Americans in this group I worked in. And one day a guy came up to me and he said, I won't mention his name, "How come you went to Villanova?" I said, "I went to Villanova because my brother went to Villanova. That's why I went to Villanova. I wanted to be an engineer." No, but all the Italians I know, the only ones that go to college are the children of the mafia. Was your father in the mafia? I said, no, my father wasn't in the mafia. Well, you're an exception. I thought about it after. And I remember talking to my mother, saying, "Mom, this guy said this to me." And she said, "Don't let it bother you. Just show them that you're better than them." Now, I know it's a lot less now. And it's not as much as my parents had to put up with, or my grandparents. It was really difficult for them.
Was it?
My parents and grandparents, it was difficult for them because they really had problems. I mean, it's a true story. My mother left because she was younger. The Catholic grammar school wasn't built. She went to the Irish Catholic school, and she quit, or she came home and complained and quit because the nun kept calling her Dago. And so my grandfather took her out of the Catholic school. There wasn't the Italian-American Catholic school that came later, and she went to public school for the last 2 years before she went to work. So it's always been there. And not as bad as it used to be, because there's lots of people who have proven to the world that Italian Americans are very valuable members of the society, and they've added a lot of value. So, but there's always been the discrimination, and it did exist, and it is what it is the way I look at it. My children feel none of that.
Since you went to Italy several times, when you went the first time, what was your emotions? What was your reaction then?
Well, it's very interesting. First of all, I was working for the General Electric Company, and they had a project in Italy with Fiat in Torino. And they asked me, I was maybe 29 years old, to head up a project team of 5 or 6 Americans to work with a project team from Fiat. So I went to live in Torino for 9 months. I worked on the Corso Marconi, and I had an apartment. When I was there, my parents said, you have to visit the family. Now, I have to say, as a boy growing up, I wanted to be an American. But when I went to Italy and I visited the families, I fell in love. Just the emotion. I remember the first time I went to Giulianova. I took a train in the middle of the night. I had a 3-day weekend. Middle of the night from Giulianova to Bologna, Bologna to Giulianova. And when I got there, my mother's first cousin and his son were waiting for me on the train station. I kept saying to myself, how are they going to know it's me? I never saw these people. So the train came in the station, I had a bag, I got off the train, and they came running to me. This was 1976. They grabbed me and brought me home, and my mother's first cousin's wife said, well, you've been up all night, you need to sleep. She had the bed made for me, I went to sleep. And the next, when I got up, middle of the day, as best I could to communicate, I said, how did you know who I was? They went in another room, and they took a book out, and it had photographs of me when I was a child, when I made my first Holy Communion, when I got confirmed, when I graduated high school. Not just me, my brother, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, in a big book. So they used to send photographs and they'd save them. So what was my emotion? I wanted to be in Italy. And I spent trying to find job opportunities that I could work there. I was in the international business. I visited my aunts that were still there. I'd take side trips to London and to see them. And I'd visit them on holiday as best I could. And so that's when I really started to appreciate the Italian culture, because it was an ongoing of what I had growing up. It was family, it was loyalty, it was, you just felt embraced. And so after I came back from this tour of duty in Torino, I started to really want to know more about my Italian background. I wanted to know more about who I was, where I came from, and very honestly, became very proud of my background. This picture, it's a beautiful picture. As you can see, it was well done. My mother looks beautiful. My dad is as handsome as can be, and they married in 1937. And this picture hung in my living room in the city of Philadelphia as a boy growing up. And I always looked at the picture and said, wow, what a beautiful picture. That's Mom and Dad. So in my mind, that's the picture I still have of my mother and father. Well, what is interesting about this picture, and I'm going to have to, this picture was taken by my mother, formally, and sent to my uncle Joe or Giuseppe who had just crossed the channel with the American Army in the Second World War. And on the back of the picture, she wrote, "Joe, you have a new nephew. His name is Gabriel." And the photograph itself in this picture has me holding a little rattle, a telephone rattle, which may have been appropriate in 1944 when I was born. And so this picture was lost in time. And I say it's about 25 years ago. My Uncle Joe came to visit me. And he had this blown up picture and the small picture that he kept with my mother's writing. And he had the picture taken to Atlantic City and colorized. And there I am sitting in a baby with this telephone rattle. And he said, "Gabe, this is so important. This picture is so important because you eventually became the CEO of 2 different telecommunications companies. How did your mother know?"
You actually even tried to find a job in Italy and stay there.
Exactly, which became difficult. I worked in General Electric International Business. I wanted to go there, but I never had the opportunity. And when I sold my last company, my desire to be closer to my roots got stronger. I became actively involved with NIAF. I was actually a member of the Columbus Foundation in New York. And then through them, I met a gentleman who's the chairman of this foundation, Joe Del Rosso, who I didn't know, and he introduced me to the American University of Rome.
Right, we were going to go to that again.
Yeah.
That you've been a member of, and then chairman now
Yes.
of the American University of Rome.
Yes.
And there are also other members of NIAF board of directors.
Right.
Member. So what is it, this American University of Rome?
The American University of Rome is an accredited university by the Middle Atlantic states in the U.S., which means if you're a student from anywhere in the world and you go to that school and you gain credits, they're usable in the United States. It's a school that was founded in 1969, and I became chairman 4 years ago. And we are moving the school forward. We've established 4 master's degrees. We're enhancing our program to drive more 4-year students and not as many study abroad students. And to me, it's a feeling of, not just for Americans, because last year we had graduates from 17 different countries, for people to recognize the culture and the value of Rome and Italy, especially to Western civilization, to culture. So my participation is driven by my love of the Italian culture. And even though everything's taught in English, the students live in apartments and they live in the Italian culture.
We cannot avoid mentioning your career, though may not have a direct connection to your Italian ancestry, or if it has, you will tell us, because you are the Greater Washington Area Communication Entrepreneur, right? You were named by Ernst & Young in
Yes.
2004. So how did you develop this passion for science and engineering, and then I think you had an intuition about the power of the internet even before or while it was starting?
Well, there is an Italian connection.
There
The
is?
Italian connection is what I mentioned before, my parents. And they encouraged me to try everything. Don't worry about failing. If it doesn't work, try something else. And I was a strong early devotee of the internet. So I actually left as the CEO of Cable and Wireless to do a small company called Network Solutions. But Network Solutions was on the forefront of the internet because they were the naming. They were the ones that gave out .com, .org, .dot. So if you wanted to be someone, you had to go to them. And they recruited me. Company was 50 people, and the idea was we're going to build a big company. And Network Solutions was a tremendous success and a financial success for me as part of it. But again, it was pushing the envelope. What else can it be? That's what helped drive my success, ending up being CEO of 3 companies, but giving all of that up to get back to my Italian roots and add value to the Italian-American culture, which I did at 59. I said, I'm done. I've made enough for me, for my family. I can live the way I want. Now I want to do what I want to do. And most of that was directed to Italian-American things.
What do you think is the main thing, the main right thing that NIAF is doing today?
NIAF is a great organization. Its focus and establishment was part of the recognition of the valuable things Italian Americans had done in this country. Today there's a million stories. There's a lot of stories, and we can all tell stories about our parents and our grandparents and the rest of that. But there's a whole part of the youth, even though they be Italian Americans, that don't relate to the culture. We don't want them to become Italians, they're Americans. But they need to have a sense for the valuable things they might have learned or they can embrace in the Italian culture. Because the Italian culture is marvelous, and when anybody understands it, they fall in love with it. So I think the most important thing for NIAF today is to figure out how to have the same spirit of core from a generation or 2 generations that are younger than I, so that they can feel the value of the Italian culture, understand it, be proud of it, be part of it. And so I think that's important if we're going to keep NIAF going for the long term.
We always end our conversations by asking our guests 2 questions. One is, what's your favorite Italian dish?
Well, it's something I call Italian soul food. And it's cannelloni beans, escargot, a little bit of tomato, chopped up carrots, and a piece of prosciutto bone, which I called as a child growing up greens and beans. That's my favorite. It's here, and everything else is real close. I could go on for the next 20 minutes and tell you everything I like. In fact, I love tripe. Harder and harder to get. I go back to the Italian neighborhoods in Philadelphia to get tripe. And I've probably ate all the southern Italian peasant foods you can imagine. And I love them all, and I miss them because it's harder and harder to get them, and some of them I don't know how to prepare.
I see. And the second question is, what's your favorite Italian song?
Although my family's not from Campania, it's Return to Sorrento. I'll tell you one short story. When I was a young man, I worked in Ottorino, Italy for 9 months. At the time, I had 2 small children. My wife didn't want to come with me, so I'd come home every 6 weeks. It was a great experience for me. I fell in love with Italy, got to meet my relatives. And 35 years later, I was in Milano for business. And I said, I want to take a train ride to Torino, because I haven't been to Torino for 35 years. And I went back. I saw the apartment I lived in. I saw the Corso Marconi, which had changed, because Fiat had moved away. It wasn't as nice as it used to be. And I went into the restaurant, same restaurant, right up the street from me, obviously different owners. And I had lunch, and I By then I could speak Italian, and I spoke to him. Where is everybody? What happened? And he told me. And when I left, I was very depressed. Because the last time I was there, my children were small. My parents were alive. It was like, I can't go back. I can't go back to what I used to go back to because it's all changed. And that sort of depressed me. It really did. It was a funny emotion. I never expected that. But all I could think of was all the good things that I had 35 years ago that don't exist now, through nobody's fault, just don't exist. And in some ways, that's like return to Sorrento. I'm sure that whoever wants to go back doesn't always find it the way he thought it was.
Mr. Battista, thank you very much.
Thank you.
For coming tonight.